Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a cold one out there. Let's have a look. Brr. That's a lot of snow. Y'all are probably still sleeping. I don't know. You're probably out. If you're not sleeping, making snowmen. And I'm right here making you video for you. This is The Effects of the War by Haiti, Amika Battle, and Lexi Hopwood. So thank you, ladies, for turning that in to me. I think we're going to just go ahead and, if it's short enough, make an Ed puzzle out of it. If it's too long, we'll just keep it a Loom video. And if I do make it an Ed puzzle, let's say it's 30 minutes. If I can keep it under 30, 40 minutes, you just do half today and half to tomorrow. So anyway, I'm assuming we will not be back in on Friday, but who knows? They might clear up all the snow by Friday. All right, so let's get to it. Kids, the moral of the story is war is bad. And typically speaking, there's really not a easy or a clean war. I mean, there can be maybe a smaller war or a bloodless coup where somebody takes over the government without a fight. But in this case, this is the worst war in American history. So many Americans died because both people fighting on either side of the Civil War were American, that more people died in this war than all other wars that we fought combined. Now, that doesn't mean that the total death count was higher than World War II. But for Americans, like globally, World War II was the worst war ever fought. Millions upon millions died. This is the highest casualty rate that we took here in the United States. You're talking about 500,000 soldiers, approximately, and then we're not even getting to the citizens yet. So let's go ahead and just flick through and see the war's won at a high cost by the North. The South is devastated, but that's not to say that the North didn't feel it too. Almost everybody, probably at this time period, we can say everybody had a relative that died or was crippled in the war. So at the time, a lot of the soldiers, of course, we didn't have modern medicines, we didn't have antibiotics, and one of the things that they did across the board was if you got shot in the arm, you were getting shot by a 60 caliber bullet, it was shattering bones. And so they were just cutting off a limb. So a lot of young men coming back from the war around age 20, they're missing arms and legs. All right, wartime economy. So Southern issues, subject, inflation, and the Confederacy, Confederate States. 1860, you can see how the prices of everything shot up between 1861 and 1865 from $1 to $1.70. That's a lot of money at that time period. I mean, first of all, you don't have big box stores, but you might be able to buy a horse for $5, right? So that'd be the modern equivalent of going out and paying for a car, buying a car that might be a couple of grand. So a used car. So just think about like what the context of that is. $5 versus two grand, or even as much as $5,000 for a used car in modern America. And then you kind of get a ballpark idea of how much money that actually is. So the problem for the South, well, let's just see what Haiti has written down here. Let me move my face. Get it over here into the corner. Here's the Confederate money. I can just tell you right off the bat, one of the main problems without even reading this is you've got 11 states, and each state is printing their own money. So they're not on the same page with the same currency. In addition to that, in order to pay, they just keep printing money. And we're seeing that happen in the United States right now. If you just continue to keep printing money, you've got more paper dollars, but that makes the value of those paper dollars go down. So to help pay for the war effort, Confederate states printed money. Like earlier forms of paper money, however, Confederate notes were backed not by gold, but by people's faith in the government. As long as people remained confident that the government could ensure the value of the money, things were fine. As the war weakened the Southern economy, however, the public lost faith in Confederate currency. The money's value plummeted and prices soared. All right, effect. The Confederacy's war inflation rate reached close to 7,000%. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I think our inflation, and I could be wrong about this, but we've inflated about, I want to say 6-7%. So imagine the price of everything going up by 7,000 times. You're paying $4 for a gallon of gas now, whatever that is, times 7,000. All right, so shortages of several products, including food, added to the price problems in the South. 3 factors contributed to this food shortage: the drain of manpower into the Army, the Union occupation of food-growing areas, and loss of slaves to work in the field. Food prices skyrocketed. In 1861, the average family spent $6.65 a month on food. By the mid-1860s, it was spending $68 a month. This situation grew so desperate that in 1863, hundreds of women and children and some men stormed bakeries and rioted for bread. The mob broke up only when President Jefferson Davis, the one and only president that the Confederate States of America ever had, climbed up on a cart, threw down all the money he had, and ordered the crowd to disperse or be shot the next day. The Confederate government distributed some of its stock of rice. Like I said, first 3 years of the Civil War go pretty well for the South, but their biggest problem is, and again, remember, we don't have the modern food supply chains that we had before. So by and large, most people are living on subsistence level farming. You're growing a lot of your own food in your backyard. Most people in the South probably had more than what a yard in Monon would be. But, whatever additional money you have is going to go into probably buying food, buying more farm equipment. And so there's not a whole lot of luxury items at this time. Unless you are living on a large plantation, right? Where it's ran by hundreds of slaves. Okay, how much higher were the prices at the end of the war at the beginning than at the beginning than the end? Wait, let me read that again. How much higher were the prices at the end of the war than at the beginning? So I'll let you answer that in case I put this on an Ed puzzle. Okay, Northern economic growth. Subject, Northern economies, 1800s, the Northern states. All right, so in the North, we have the opposite effect, and we'll talk about the Winchesters after the Civil War. They're pretty cool to study in the Victorian era. But the North was always more manufacturing than the South. But this really kicks manufacturing into overdrive. So what's happening is we're producing all these goods in the North for war, like Winchester rifles, and we're getting migration from Europe. Irish are coming this way, and we're getting those Irishmen right into the army and into the factories as soon as they get off the boats. So our economy in the North, at least I would assume that Northern manufacturing is just booming. All right, so cause. While the economy in the North was booming, wages did not keep up with prices, and many people's standards of living declined. White male workers went on strike. effect. Since white male workers went on strike, employers hired free blacks, immigrants, women, and boys to replace them for lower pay. So this is going to be a dynamic that moving forward we're going to really look at, because what happens is this leads to a really, really wealthy upper class dominating American society, and most people working in factories for lower wages, right? So at this time period, we're talking like 5 cents an hour. Think about that. We're doing 15 cents or about $15 an hour for most jobs right now. All right, the South's prices were rising. They were suffering a food shortage. They lost faith in the government, and money lost its value. In the North, for the most part, the economy was booming. They didn't lose faith in the government, and their money didn't lose its value. While inflation did drive prices in the North upward, they did not rise to nearly the degree that they did in the South. All right, true or false? African Americans, immigrants, women, boys worked for the same price as white men. Good question. Soldiers suffer on both sides by Amika. I've got some documentaries that are just so grim. I mean, the level of medicine at this time is, I mean, it's not like living in the Middle Ages. We are using like anesthetic, and we're cleaning tools and things like that. But it's, I mean, when you're having a hacksaw through somebody's leg, it's pretty ugly. All right, Civil War medicine, 20th century, battlefields and prisons. Okay, cause, weapon technology overtook medical technology. Operations were set up in nearby homes or barns. Use of heavy lead mini balls. Those lead mini balls are the 60 caliber bullets I'm talking about that would just literally, like, if it went through your femur, it would just shatter your femur. So the federal government set up the United States Sanitary Commission. North had halted prisoner exchanges when the South refused to return African American soldiers captured in battle. All right, this is, anytime you have war, you get inventiveness, and they're starting to realize in the Civil War, we need to have clean sanitary conditions. We need to have the toilets downstream from the camp so guys don't catch diseases and dysentery from drinking water. And we need to clean our tools when we cut off a leg. Soldiers had more amputations due to bacteria. Infection happened a lot more often. Soldiers were more likely to break a leg or a bone because of the lead balls. Sanitary conditions improved after the federal government set up the Sanitary Commission, and death rates went down. Improvements in hygiene and nursing did not reach war prisoners. The prisoners drank from the same stream that served as their sewers. Ugh, yuck. And a lot of them died from disease when doing that. They had no shelter. The prisons were overcrowded because of the North and the South. It was particularly bad in the South. I haven't really seen a lot of stories on the prisons in the North, but in the South, their economy is really struggling. They're having food shortages as well, pretty extreme food shortages. So who's the last to get food in a country where you have food shortages? That's going to be the prisoners of war. So there's a lot of bad conditions. Northern soldiers were thrown in these prison camps where a lot of them died from disease or starvation. And there were several prosecutions of Confederate officers due to the treatment of Northern soldiers during the war at this time. It's pretty bad. They look like concentration camp victims, and maybe I can show you a picture of that later. All right, question. Why were amputations more common in the Civil War? The Nation After the War by Lexi Hopwood. All right, political changes. Southern states and the federal government. When? 1896. I think this goes all the way up. Really, we kind of consider the post-war period to go all the way up to almost the 1880s and 90s. So we have at least a 10-year Reconstruction period after the war, and then you've got another 10 or so years where everything's affected by that. So keep in mind, if you're a 20-year-old veteran of the Civil War, 20 years down the road, you're 40, and you might be a businessman, an entrepreneur, a politician, and these are the guys that end up running the country. The Civil War vets end up running the country in the 80s and 90s, and even maybe a little bit into the early 1900s. All right, decades after the war, Southern states threatened secession when federal policies angered them. Then shortly after the war, the federal government assumed supreme national authority, and no state has ever seceded again. In fact, the states' rights issue did not go away. It led to a different direction from secession. Now there are arguments about states' rights versus federal control focus on such issues as whether the state or national government should determine how to use local funds. The federal government's power was also increased because of them ending the threat of secession. So I think the important takeaway from this is after the Revolutionary War, remember, we're 13 separate colonies. After the Revolutionary War, we're considered 13 different countries, and we came together in a union. So a country, we also call a country a state or a nation state, and so we became a group of united states, a united group of nation states. And at least all the way up to the Civil War, there was a big argument about if you join the union of these separate nations, can you leave? Can you leave those nations? Can you decide to go on your own? Kind of like England decided to exit from the European Union. That argument came up again and again. It put us into conflict over the nullification crisis under Andrew Jackson. And it finally comes to an explosive head here during the Civil War. And Lincoln pretty much settles this question. And that question is, if you break away, you can join, but you just can't ever leave. If you break away, the federal government will come with the troops, and the rest of the union, the states, will come and squash your state and reincorporate you into the union. Now, the second part of what Lexi's saying here is, after the Civil War, it's no longer a question, can you leave the United States or not? Or who's more powerful, federal or state government? Those questions are solved in the Civil War. The federal government is supreme. The states, basically have to accept what the federal government mandates. And now it's just a matter of arguing over how to spend the funding that states tax their own citizens versus what the federal government gives them. And we get into issues like we saw it with women's rights to vote. We see it with alcohol and prohibition. Individual states start to adopt individual policies. And currently we're seeing it with legalization of marijuana and abortion rights. So there are definitely states out there that are trying to limit abortion as much as they can. Currently, it's federal law that abortion is legal under Roe versus Wade, but you have states like Texas and Mississippi that are challenging that and trying to challenge that in court and give them legal precedence to dictate whether abortion would be legal or not. All right, question. True or false? Federal government's power decreased after they ended the threat of secession. Okay, economic changes. The government, National Bank Act of 1863, states and southern states. Probably north. I think she means to say northern states and southern. Oh, yeah, there's northern. I see it over here. Northern states and southern states. When 1861 to 1865 were the United States. And here's how the territories split up. So you have the northern states, you got territories, other countries. That would be the Confederacy at this time period. Disputed areas in red, and the green is Confederacy. Oh, other states is Hawaii and Alaska. Those don't belong to us yet. Though they're not part of the Union yet during the Civil War. All right, economic changes. Cause. The Civil War had a profound impact on the nation's economy. The federal government did much to help businesses. Then the government also passed the National Bank Act of 1863, which set up a system of federally chartered banks, set requirements for loans, and provided for banks to be inspected. By war's end, large-scale commercial agriculture had taken hold. The war devastated the South's economy. It took away the South's source of cheap labor and wrecked most of the region's industry. The South was just a mess. I mean, most of the war, outside of like right along the Ohio River, maybe just on either side of the Ohio River with a few minor battles, most of the war takes place in the South. Okay, what act did the government pass? Okay, subject, cost of the war, the Civil War, Union soldiers, and veterans, 1800s, United States. Okay, cause, the human costs of the Civil War were staggering. Approximately 360,000 Union soldiers and 260,000 Confederate soldiers. So I said 500,000. I guess that'd be closer to 600,000, right? Another 275,000 Union soldiers and 225,000 Confederate soldiers were wounded. And again, I want to emphasize, when we're talking about a wound, we're not just talking about a little scratch. Usually what they mean by that is the bullet has entered your body, and as a result, you had an arm or a leg hacksawed off. You got a stump now. You're walking with crutches, or you don't have an arm anymore. Okay, so the war's terrible cost in human lives was the result of several factors. The combination of new deadly weapons. We did invent the machine gun during this time period. Old-fashioned tactics proved devastating. We'll see this time and time again. We invent the machine gun, and it took us a while to figure out that what you don't want to do is have a bunch of men charge a machine gun. That's usually like you lose a lot of life in that case. Now, the machine gun that I'm talking about is the Gatling gun, and it really doesn't come into play until the very, very end of the war. But it is a new invention as of 1864, I think. So it only saw the last few months of the war, and they used it to devastating effect on the South. So about 5 soldiers died of disease for every 3 that died in battle. Okay, so effect. Even those who had survived found it had cost them dearly. About 2,400,000 men, nearly 10% of the nation's population of approximately 31,000, served in the military for 4 long years. The Civil War's economic costs were just as expensive. It was estimated that the Union and the Confederate governments spent a combined total of about $3.3 billion. And that was over 180 years ago. So who knows how much that would be worth in today's dollars. We're talking probably trillions, if not hundreds of trillions. All right, about how much overall money did they spend during the war? The War Changes Lives by Haiti, Lexi, and Amika. New Birth of Freedom. All right, the Emancipation Proclamation. Yay, we finally become a society that honors civil rights for all people, except for women. That doesn't happen for the girls yet. All right, Lincoln issues under his war powers. This only freed slaves who lived in states that were behind Confederate lines. The president believed that the only way to free the rest would be a constitutional amendment getting rid of slavery. This amendment was thought about for a few years and finally passed on January 31st, 1865. It is the 13th Amendment. Thank you, Amika. And the 13th Amendment basically bans slavery in the United States. Now, there are a couple other amendments that follow the 13th, because what ends up happening is the 13th Amendment is passed, and then you get southern states that their response to the 13th Amendment are to create laws that still limit African Americans' freedoms. So we have to end up passing the 14th and 15th Amendment to guarantee African Americans citizenship, because southern states wouldn't give them citizenship. And then we had to pass the 15th Amendment to give African Americans the right to vote, because southern states wouldn't give them the right to vote. So 13, 14, and 15 are about freeing the slaves, giving African Americans citizenship. Actually, it's any male. At that time, it was any male born within the country had citizenship. And then the 15th Amendment was the right for any male citizen to vote. All right, by the end of the 27 states, by the end of the year, 27 states, including 8 states from the South, had ratified the 13th Amendment. That stated neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. So there is a clause in here that says we can use criminals as free labor. And we'll see when we move into the late 1800s and early 1900s how Jim Crow affects that a little bit. So Jim Crow laws were laws that made us a segregated society in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So with the passing of slaves now became free, including those in hiding. This amendment also ending the previous 3/5 compromise, which was politically defined as slaves as less than whites. So in the original Constitution, designed by James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington, they had a 3/5 compromise that allowed for slavery. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments ends that. We live in an America that's post-Civil War, post-13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, where we actually have civil rights. Now, there's a lot of court cases fought after that. There's a lot of to-do about segregation and Jim Crow laws that we're going to get to. So this all takes another 100 years to resolve, but step by step, one of the great parts of the American story is that step by step, we eventually create the society we live in now, which is a free society where everybody has rights. Okay, so what amendment was passed on January 31st, 1865? Okay, civilians follow new paths. Whoops, excuse me. By Heidi Herrera. All right, civilians follow new paths. The people who served in the war have to find new directions for their life after the war. Okay, I'm just thinking right off the top of my head here that if we're fighting in a war, over slavery and I own a plantation with hundreds of slaves, suddenly my economic power is gone. At this point, I'm going to have to rebuild, I'm going to have to recreate my life, right? So, cause at the end of the war, those who had served, Northerners and Southerners alike, had to find new directions for their lives. Some leaders continued their military careers while others returned to civilian life. William Tecumseh Sherman remained in the Army and spent most of his time fighting Native Americans in the West. Yeah, that's not really a pretty chapter in American history. William T. Sherman, who was one of the big heroes of the Civil War, which he made the South submit, now takes all this new war technology and turns it on the Indians that live west of the Mississippi. So the Native Americans living west of the Mississippi, unlike the Native Americans living east of the Mississippi, are having to deal with rapid fire weapons, steam engines, and a very mobile, highly high-tech U.S. military right after the Civil War. All right. So Robert E. Lee lost Arlington, his plantation, which the Secretary of the War of Union had turned into a cemetery for Union dead. Lee became president of Washington College in Virginia, now known as Washington and Lee University. Lee swore renewed allegiance to the United States. Many veterans returned to their small towns and farms after the war. Others, as Grant noted, found they were not satisfied with the farm, the store, or the workshop of the villages, but wanted larger fields. Many went west in search of opportunities. Others tried to turn their wartime experience to good. The horrors that the Union nurse Clara Barton witnessed during the war inspired her to spend her life helping others. In 1868, Barton went to Europe to rest and recuperate from her work during the war. Returning to the United States, Barton helped found the American Red Cross in 1881. So she was kind of the chief head nurse of the Union Army, and she did a lot of good. And she ends up really kind of creating modern nursing as we know it, and founds the Red Cross. Hey, that's our last slide. So let me just kind of conclude here with just a couple of final words. I know you've heard me say this, but really, our founding fathers are the ones that kind of lay the foundations for the country, but it's really Abraham Lincoln that turned us into a civil rights society where everyone who's a citizen has certain fundamental rights and can participate in our Republican-style democracy. Okay? Every person that's a citizen, as long as you register to vote the proper way, has the right to vote and participate in our democracy. And we also have guaranteed rights and laws. Now, do we still have issues? Yeah, of course. We still got issues. Every country has issues. But it's really, I think probably the coolest thing about the American story is it really is a gradual process of starting a democracy and then step by step taking moves to improve the lives of its citizens and protect the rights of its citizens, right? And so today we're living in my opinion, a much better world than people were living in pre-1860. But anyway, that's modern America, and Abraham Lincoln is given the credit for creating that. Really, he didn't create the Constitution, but what he does leads to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So that's it for today. Still haven't decided if I'm going to loom this or do it Ed Puzzle. If it is an Ed Puzzle, we'll do it over 2 days. I'm sure that it's probably more than 30 minutes. But thanks again, girls. And then, final word to Linda, Evelyn, and Dora, or anybody that may have contact to them, if you guys can send me your slideshow, we'll present it as well. Thanks a lot. Have a nice few snow days and enjoy your time. Go build a snowman. Go sledding. Think about your freedoms that you have. Thanks, guys. Bye.